For more than 1,000 years, one name ruled medicine. Not a living doctor, not a practicing surgeon, a ghost, a voice from the 2nd century AD whose words had been carved into the walls of every medical school in Europe and treated as though they had come from God himself. His name was Galen, a Greek physician, brilliant in his time, prolific in his writings, and dead for over 1,300 years. Yet every professor, every student, every surgeon in medieval Europe bowed to his authority. If Galen said the liver had 5 lobes, then the liver had 5 lobes. If Galen said the human femur curved a certain way, then that was the shape of the human femur. No one questioned it. No one checked. The Church had adopted Galen as the final word on the human body, just as it had adopted Aristotle as the final word on physics. And for centuries, that was enough. But here's the problem. Galen had never dissected a human body. Much of his anatomy was based on animals, dogs, pigs, monkeys. He had made assumptions, drawn conclusions from the wrong species, and built an entire system of knowledge on a foundation riddled with errors. And because no one dared to challenge him, those errors had been taught as truth for over a millennium. It took a young man from Brussels, stubborn, fearless, and obsessed with the dead, to tear that system apart. His name was Andreas Vesalius, and he didn't just correct a few mistakes, he rebuilt the entire science of anatomy from the ground up. Vesalius was born on December 31st, 1514, in Brussels, which at the time was part of the sprawling Habsburg Empire. Medicine ran in his blood. His father, also named Andreas, served as the personal pharmacist to Emperor Charles V. His mother, Isabel Crabbe, came from a respectable family, but perhaps the most telling detail about Vesalius's childhood is this. The family home sat near the city gallows. That's where criminals were executed, and where their bodies were left hanging for days, exposed to the elements and picked apart by birds. Most children would have looked away. Vesalius looked closer. From a very young age, he began dissecting small animals, stray dogs, cats, anything he could get his hands on. While other boys played, Vesalius was peeling back skin and studying what lay underneath. There was something inside this child, a hunger to see, to understand, to know what the body actually looked like beneath the surface. Not what the book said it looked like, what it actually was. After attending the University of Louvain, Vesalius moved to Paris in 1533 to study medicine at one of the most prestigious and most conservative universities in Europe. Paris was a bastion of tradition, a place where Galen's word was law and questioning it was practically heresy. While there, Vesalius assisted a professor named Gunther of Andernach in publishing an anatomy textbook, a book that Vesalius would later note, with barely concealed disdain, revealed just how little the author actually understood about the structure of the human body. But Vesalius wasn't content to sit in lecture halls and listen to professors read from ancient texts. He went out looking for bodies. He haunted the cemetery of the innocents, collecting bones. He made trips to Montfaucon, where the bodies of executed criminals hung from the gibbet, and examined them in the open air, risking, as he would later write, his own safety because of the packs of wild dogs that prowled the area. Imagine that scene for a moment. A young medical student, alone in the dark, pulling bones from rotting corpses while feral dogs circled around him. That was the kind of man Vesalius was. When he wanted to know something, nothing, not danger, not disgust, not convention, was going to stop him. In 1536, war between France and the Holy Roman Empire forced Vesalius to leave Paris. He returned to the University of Louvain, earned his medical license, and then made the move that would define his career. He went to the University of Padua. Padua was special. It was one of the great intellectual crossroads of the Renaissance. Nicholas Copernicus had studied there. Galileo Galilei would later teach there. And it was at Padua that Vesalius would do the work that changed medicine forever. In 1537, immediately after earning his doctorate, magna cum laude, he was appointed professor of anatomy and surgery. He was 23 years old. Now, to understand why what Vesalius did was so revolutionary, you need to understand what anatomy teaching actually looked like in the 16th century. Dissection wasn't technically banned. It had been allowed since the 14th century. But the way it was conducted was almost comically absurd. Here's how it worked. Students would sit in a gallery, looking down from above. On the floor below, a barber, not a doctor, a barber, would cut open the cadaver. And while the barber hacked away, the professor would stand at a lectern, reading aloud from Galen's texts. He wasn't looking at the body. He wasn't guiding the dissection. He was reading a book written 13 centuries earlier by a man who had never opened a human being. Vesalius described this system with open contempt. Everything he said was taught wrong. Time was wasted on meaningless academic arguments, and the students, the ones who were supposed to be learning, gained less useful knowledge than a doctor who had served his apprenticeship with a butcher. So Vesalius did something radical. He picked up the knife himself. He stepped down from the lectern, stood over the cadaver, and began dissecting with his own hands. In front of his students, in real time, pointing out structures, explaining what he was seeing, inviting them to look, to touch, to understand. It was electrifying. Word spread fast. Students packed his lectures. His reputation grew. In 1538, he published his first major work, 6 anatomical charts, beautifully illustrated by the Flemish artist Jan Stephen van Kalkar, a student of Titian himself. The charts still operated within the Galenic framework, but they hinted at something deeper, a direction Vesalius was heading that would soon leave Galen far behind. 2 years later, he was invited to give a lecture and demonstration at the Church of San Francesco in Bologna. And there, in front of an audience that included the prominent Galenist professor Matteo Corti, Vesalius did something nobody expected. He systematically exposed error after error in Galen's anatomy, calmly, precisely, with the evidence laid open on the table in front of him. Corti was humiliated. The audience was stunned. The old guard was beginning to crack. And then, in 1543, Vesalius delivered the blow that shattered the old world for good. He published De Humani Corporis Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body. It was, without exaggeration, the most important anatomy book ever written. A massive, meticulously detailed atlas of the human body, illustrated with extraordinary precision and beauty. Every page was a revelation. Every chapter was a correction. The human femur, Vesalius showed, is not curved like that of a dog. The number of ribs is the same in men and women, despite what centuries of tradition had claimed. The liver does not have 5 lobes. The uterus is not horned. One by one, the pillars of Galen's anatomy came crashing down. And yet, remarkably, Vesalius was careful. He didn't attack Galen directly. He admired the ancient physician, genuinely. But he also understood that admiration and truth are not the same thing. Galen had worked with what he had. He had studied animals because human dissection was forbidden in his time. His mistakes were understandable, but they were still mistakes. And after 13 centuries, someone finally had the courage and the evidence to say so. De Fabrica wasn't just a reference book, it was a call to action. Vesalius wrote it as a practical guide, urging students to pick up the knife themselves, to explore the body with their own hands, to stop trusting second-hand knowledge and start seeing for themselves. His instructions were vivid, almost conversational. He told students when to be careful with fragile ribs, how to clean flesh from bone, where to watch for individual variations between bodies. He wanted them to understand that anatomy wasn't a set of fixed, memorized facts. It was a living, breathing discipline that demanded direct observation. The book was a sensation, but not everyone cheered. Vesalius's colleagues, many of whom had built their careers on Galen's authority, turned on him with venom. The most vicious attack came from Jacobus Silvius, a prominent professor who had actually been one of Vesalius's own teachers in Paris. In 1551, Silvius published a text with a title that tells you everything you need to know: a refutation of the calumnies of a madman against the writings of Hippocrates and Galen. In one of his milder passages, Silvius urged his readers to pay no attention to, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly, a certain ridiculous madman, an individual without a shred of talent who rails against his teachers. A madman. That's what they called the man who had just rewritten the foundations of human anatomy. But the truth has a way of outlasting its critics. Within decades, Vesalius's work had swept through the medical schools of Europe. By the early 17th century, with the exception of a few stubborn holdouts like Paris, his anatomy had become the new standard, accepted in both academic and popular circles. De Fabrica had appeared, almost symbolically, just 1 week after Copernicus published De Revolutionibus, and it stirred just as much intellectual upheaval. 2 books, released within days of each other, that together dismantled the medieval understanding of both the heavens and the human body. Shortly after publishing De Fabrica, Vesalius made a decision that has puzzled historians ever since. He accepted a position as personal physician to Emperor Charles V, leaving behind the world of academic anatomy. Perhaps it shouldn't surprise us. His family had a long tradition of royal service, and the role came with enormous prestige. He was a gifted doctor, widely respected, and he continued to revise his great work, publishing an updated edition of De Fabrica in 1555. Even as a court physician, he visited medical faculties when he could. When Charles V abdicated in 1556 in favor of his son, Philip II of Spain, Vesalius stayed on. The end of his life remains shrouded in uncertainty. In 1564, while returning from a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, his ship was wrecked. Vesalius died on the island of Zante, off the coast of the Peloponnese. He was 49 years old. The man who had spent his life demanding clarity and precision met an end that history has never fully explained. And then, nearly 4 centuries after his death, Vesalius suffered one final indignity, not from a rival anatomist, but from a psychiatrist. In 1943, on the 400th anniversary of De Fabrica, the Bulletin of the History of Medicine published a special commemorative issue. Most of the contributions were respectful. One scholar praised Vesalius for wearing the robe of a humanist. But then came an article by Gregory Zilborg, a psychiatrist who decided to psychoanalyze a man who had been dead for nearly 400 years. In Zilborg's diagnosis, Vesalius was a schizophrenic, a depressive, a man who should have been a butcher rather than a scientist. He called him a coward who never had the courage to face his opponents. This from a man writing about the 23-year-old who had stood up in front of the entire medical establishment of Europe and told them they were wrong. It's worth noting that Zilborg wrote this in 1943, in the middle of the Second World War, when both Italy and Germany, the countries where Vesalius had done his greatest work, were enemies of the United States. The analysis says more about the analyst than the subject. Vesalius deserves better. He deserves to be remembered for what he actually was. A man who grew up next to a gallows, who collected bones in cemeteries, who fought off wild dogs to study the dead, and who, armed with nothing but a knife and an unwillingness to accept what everyone else believed, tore down 13 centuries of medical dogma and built something real in its place. He opened the human body, and in doing so, he opened the door to modern medicine. That was Andreas Vesalius.